I'm a forms guy, and it's pretty straightforward. But what I will tell you is the inspection form is something we have not seen a lot of in the last couple of years. It's Form 35. When I started in the real estate business, I worked for a guy. And what I learned is if you didn't have an inspection with your offer, they weren't going to take it as a serious offer. And so an offer that had an inspection as opposed to one that had no inspection usually held a little bit more weight. And so what's funny, we can kind of tell the health or the place of the market by the forms that are being utilized. And so the word right now is that the market is normalizing. And so a normal offer would have contingencies wrapped up in it. If you're going to buy a car, you're going to have a contingency wrapped up in it. And so the most basic contingency, and one that we used on almost every offer, which also allowed us to keep the contingencies to a minimum, would be the 35. And that would say, oh, come on, Josiah, there you go. So, the basic contingency would be the 35. When I first started, I was putting in title contingencies and all these things. And my managing broker said, if you think about a contingency, it's an if then. So if this doesn't go this way, then the buyers can walk and the seller has to go to market. So the more contingencies you put in, kind of the more scary it is. And so we started realizing like the biggest protection anybody's going to have is under the inspection contingency, because under the inspection contingency, you can walk away and get your earnest money. And so all these other contingencies that have shorter timelines aren't even necessary. So really, this is the big one. And so what I love about the inspection contingency is if you get an offer accepted with it, you get to what's called site control. Have you guys heard that term?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was hoping Ashley would be here. She was buying a house from Celia, my house. So I was really getting creative.
Sell you my house. That's clever.
Sell you my house.
That's clever, Joe.
Yeah. But anywho, you guys are gonna buy it from Sell You My House. So and so what it is we've got to really think about computation of time and what we get when we have this. So if your offer is accepted with an inspection contingency, you have what's called site control, meaning nobody can take it away from you. Like you could literally ask for the whole purchase price of the house and concessions, and all they can say is no, but they can't not sell it to you. You have the option to walk away. The sellers are committed to you as the buyer. So it's what we call site control. And so oftentimes, if I know that there's going to be some work on a home and we're going to need to do some negotiation, that's where a lot of the strong negotiation will come in. We'll get the offer accepted with the contingency. We'll get our inspection done, and then we can ask the seller to do certain stuff. So with that, let's move forward and talk about it. So I'm just going to read through it. If you remember from training, everything's supposed to be in everyday language. And I think it's supposed to be written at a 10th grade level. Don't quote me on that. That being said, if we slow ourselves down and read it, oftentimes we'll be able to answer our own questions. And so it just says inspection contingency. This agreement is conditioned on buyer's subjective satisfaction with inspections of the property and the improvements of the property. So that means that they're going to be subjective. They're going to inspect the whole property and any improvements that the sellers have done to the home. It says the buyer's inspection can include, and this is optional of the buyer. So the reoccurring thing is buyer. If you remember from the real estate licensing exam, they use the word caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. And so we don't want to be caught holding the bag. Like we have to represent that this is an inspection done by a third party. It's not Josiah doing the inspection. So like what the inspector says is what you have to go through. If I were to say, hey, the roof looks good, but the inspector says the roof does not look good, you don't go by what I say, you go by what the inspector says. And so it's really important. And they're very clear on this. So buyer's inspections can include without limitation. So the seller can't say you don't have the right to inspect that if they give you the inspection. The structural, the mechanical, and the general condition and improvements to the property, compliance with building and zoning codes, and inspection of the property for hazardous materials, a pest inspection, and a soil stability inspections. Buyer's general home inspection must be performed by the buyer or a person licensed under RCW 18.280. Buyer may engage specialists like plumbers, electricians, roofers, etc., to conduct further inspections of the property. So it tells us that we can get specialists in there if we need to. It also says that it's the buyer's responsibility. And so the inspection has to be done by either the buyer or the buyer's hired inspector. So you can't just say, I have an inspection contingency and then back out without having done an inspection on the house. In theory, like they could hold you to the task if you haven't done that. So if they do have an inspection, it's important that somebody goes in there in the allotted time and conducts an inspection. Here's another one, and I always check this. Only one time in my career has a client wanted to actually show up, but it says buyer's inspection of the property may include a sewer system, which may include a sewer line video inspection and assessment, and may require the inspector to remove toilets or other fixtures to access the sewer line. Always check that, because a sewer scope is always something that we want to talk about, and maybe an inspection we do. The other one I was checking, sorry, it was on the on the sewer form, the sewer contingency. You can check that the buyer has the right to attend it. So that's another inspection, but always check this just in case your buyer wants to do a sewer scope. And we can talk about, go ahead.
I did that. And I had an agent call me. This was about 3 years ago. And so I stopped checking it and just left it open. But she called me and was yelling at me like, I have never seen such a thing. When does anybody ever want to get the sewer checked out and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I can tell you, because we own a sewer company, that we get calls all the time from real estate agents. So don't tell me that agents don't, have sewer inspections, because they do. But she was just having a fit.
Yeah, that's a one-off, and by them not allowing you to do that, they're not allowing you to do your full inspection. And it's clearly laid out right there that is a right that you have if they're inspecting the and so to me, that would be a kind of a clue that they're trying to not have something looked at. So that would actually make me want to do it more. Again, it's not always an inspection we conduct, but it's definitely something that if we're getting an inspection contingency accepted, we want to make sure that we give the full opportunity to. And so on this part, this is really what I call the what who paragraph. It tells you what they can inspect and who is in charge of it. So again, to recap that paragraph, it's at the buyer's discretion. They can do any and all of these inspections, and it has to be performed by an inspector or by the buyer themselves. So that was when I reread the form, that was another thing I remembered. So buyer does have the option to do their own inspection under the inspection contingency. So the how, that's the next paragraph. That's the buyer's obligation. So we'll just read through this one again. All inspections are to be ordered by a buyer, performed by the inspectors of buyer's choice. So again, we can give the suggestions to the buyer, but ultimately they hire the inspector. It's really important that you remind them that inspector works for them and not for us. Buyers shall not alter property or any improvements on the property without first obtaining seller's permission. Buyer is solely responsible for interviewing, selecting all inspectors. Buyers shall restore the property and all the improvements on the property to the same condition they were in prior to the inspection. Buyers shall be responsible for all damages resulting from any inspection of the property performed on a buyer's behalf. So we've had, I've been on an inspection where and it was a very easy thing to solve, but we were responsible, or the buyer was responsible. The garage door shut and it wouldn't open back up. And so the buyers had to get that fixed. And so again, if any damage has occurred by your inspector, it's the buyer's responsibility to fix that. And so they make it very clear here. So what we want to remember here is that we're not responsible for picking the inspector. We can guide them to make a selection of an inspector and remind them that inspector works for them, and that they have the right to inspect all the different types of inspections we talked about in paragraph 1. So again, remind you, this is when we have site control. So we go in and we really get to take a look. It's a total swing of what's been happening, where we go in, we make a decision in 10 minutes. Now we secure the property and we can go in and we spend a couple hours learning about the property. Okay, so this is where we get into the computation of time. And so when we write in every form, when we start writing offers together, every form you can use to strengthen and really negotiate. And a lot of that is manipulating the time working on the different time pieces. So again, under the buyer's notice, it says this inspection contingency shall conclusively be waived and seller shall not be obligated to make any repairs or modifications unless within blank days. So here, it will always tell you if you do not pick a date, what the default is. Now, 10 days, if you remember, is going to be calendar days and not business days, because we're over 7 days. So anything under 7 days is business days. So there we go. Again, so we want to really work this time, but it goes on to saying, here's the options. After mutual acceptance of this agreement, the initial inspection period, buyer gives notice approving the inspection and waiving this contingency. So they can say, hey, house is great. We don't want you to do anything. This is a satisfied contingency. We can move on. Or they can say, we disapprove of the inspection and we're terminating this agreement. So we don't even have to tell them that the floor is warped and all this stuff. We don't want the house. It smells funny. We don't have to tell them any of that stuff. As agents, we just check the box. It says that we're terminating it. They will instruct escrow to release the earnest money and the deal's done. We walk away. The sellers can put it back to market, whatever they want. So that's choice B. But normally it's going to be choice C, that the buyer will conduct, or sorry, D. Also, we have the option C to say, hey, we need additional time to do additional inspections. So if we went under there and said, there's a really bad leak under the house, maybe we still want the house, like maybe it's just a joint that can be fixed, no big deal. So we want to actually investigate a little further. So we can say we're going to acquire additional inspections, and that's a right that they have, not something that we need permission for. So we have a right to do additional so. And then D is what most commonly is going to be chosen, proposing repairs to the property or modifications to the agreement. If buyer disapproves the inspection and terminates the agreement, the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. If buyer proposes repairs to the property or modification to the agreement, including adjustments to the purchase price, credit for repairs to be performed after closing, the parties shall negotiate as foreset in paragraph 6 below. The parties may use MLS Form 35R to give notices required by this addendum. And so we'll talk about that briefly at the end. But what's important here to know is you can't just get money for your clients. Like it's not, they can't have $10,000 back after closing to go do repairs. So the way we do this is if they want to keep money in their pocket so they can handle the repairs, because oftentimes I don't want to trust the seller's repair man. They're already invested on getting out. Why would they want to go and hire the work to be done the way maybe I'd want it to be done? So for me personally, I would rather have money for that. Well, they can't just give me money so I can go hire Joe the plumber. That's not legal. It has to come in the form of a credit, and a credit can only go towards money that's going to be spent towards closing costs and prepaids. And so we always want to know how much the closing costs are so we know how much we can ask for, because if we get more money for it and it can't be used towards the purchase of the home, then we don't get it. It's wasted. So we want to make sure when we ask for a credit towards closing costs that we don't ask for more than what we can actually utilize. Another thing we can do is ask for a reduction in price to offset that. That doesn't change the equitable position for a client. If they only have limited money, that doesn't really help them to do the repairs, but maybe they really don't care. They just want the house for 20 grand less because, they're going to do the work on themselves or down the road or something like that. Or sometimes maybe it's just a client that's just not handy and they just want to move in ready and they don't care. Then we can ask for the repairs to be made by the seller prior to closing. It has to be done 3 days before closing so we can rehire our inspector to come out and re-inspect that if we want to do that, if we're not satisfied or can't tell ourselves. So that's where timelines become very important. And so we can read through that paragraph, but that's the gist of it. It says buyer's notice, the inspection contingency after 10 days after mutual acceptance of the agreement. Buyer gives notice approving the inspection. Sorry, we're at D, proposing repairs to the property or modifications to the agreement. If buyer disapproves the inspection and terminates the agreement, the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. If buyer proposes repairs, property modifications to the agreement, including adjustments to the purchase price or credit to repairs, that's the closing costs, to be formed, the party shall negotiate as set forth in 35R, and that's how we respond. So if you think about R, I just say response. I know that 35 is an inspection, so I just tell myself the inspection response. That's how I just remember that in my head. Now they've added the 35W for the waiver of inspection. That's a new form. Okay, so here is where it gets really important. Oh yeah.
So how many days do you put in there for modifications? If you're going to, under the buyer's notice, 10 days is the default. How many days do you put in there when you do them?
Well, that's where building the relationship with the agent helps me to decide that. I don't have like a cookie cutter answer. I want to give my clients as much time as possible, but I want to make the sellers think I'm trying to do it as quickly as possible for their benefit. So like if it's a Tuesday, I might say, hey, we'll do this by, we'll do a 3-day inspection or a 2-day inspection. That way, if we do not come together on this, you can have it back on the market by the weekend. I'm doing that because the market is pretty saturated with buyers and not enough inventory, but and so I don't want to upset the agent, but I still want to get it accomplished. If I think that I can get it by them, I might say 3 days, knowing that the timeline does not end on a weekend. So I have till Monday. So I got 2 extra days. So I'll work with the numbers of the days to figure out how can I give my clients the most time.
Yeah.
But always want to present it as if I'm doing a service. That's the whole balance in what we do here. How can I protect my sellers or my clients, but act like I'm really working to serve the needs of the seller too? And that's where we have communication. I know that's not a direct answer, but I don't have one for you.
Well, I guess it kind of depends on the inspector too. I mean, can you get an inspector out there within 3 days? You know?
Yeah, and usually, so what I'll have done is I'll know kind of my strategy. So I'll call a couple of inspectors that my clients are okay with me calling to see their availability. So I can literally present it and say, hey, Cindy, here's an offer. You know, hey, we're going to do a real quick inspection. We'll have it back on the market by Friday if we want to walk away. But I've already talked to my inspector and he's ready to get in there tomorrow. So I will actually use that to sell my offer.
Right.
I'll be like, hey, you know, we kept it real short. My clients just want to look under the hood. Everything's positive. We're moving forward. We're real excited about this house. Hey, and by the way, I've already talked to my inspector. I can get him out there this afternoon. Would that be okay? So
yeah, that's great.
that
makes sense.
Because I just really want site control. I just want to stop it because I know once I have site control, they're waiting on me. So, and the more we can drag it out and use our timelines, the more likely. So for example, in that, if I did a 3-day inspection and we carried over the weekend, I might tell them I'm going to get it done by the end of the weekend, but I don't have to. And I'm certainly going to work my timeline because now a whole nother weekend's come by. There's more doubt. The longer it takes, there's more doubt in the seller's mind, the easier it is for me to come together on terms.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, yeah. All right. So now this is where we've got to look at some new rule changes. And this is really, really important. So I'm going to read this and we're going to talk about it. Inspection report. So once they've done the inspection, the buyer's going to get this great report for their eyes only. Buyer shall not provide the inspection report or portions of the report to the seller unless seller requests otherwise or as required by paragraph 5. So I would not do a verbal like, oh, could you just send that over to the seller? Yeah, please submit that to me in email form and I'd be happy to accommodate that.
Right.
Because here's the problem. Terry, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. I just ran into this. Does the inspector have, do they have to get permission from the buyer to share it with me as their agent?
Technically, yes, but most of the time they'll just send it over. But yeah, I worked with one that I had to get consent every single time. But
okay,
you know,
I just had that recently where it was like, yeah, if the buyer says it's okay.
Yeah, don't be offended. That's an old school agent. Because remember, we started this whole deal that they work for the buyer, they're hired by the buyer, and so you know that releases us of any liability, which is great. But with that, we also need permission. But I can't think of a reason they wouldn't want to because you're going to be negotiating with it on their behalf. So
yeah, right. Okay.
But again, you're not an expert on that report and you let them know, like, you got to defer to that report. I never make myself an expert. Like, yeah, that's questionable. Would that impede you from moving forward? Do we need to look and see if we have to look any further? Oh no, it's fine. I expect a little bit of stuff. But yeah, we don't ever want to assume that we know more than the inspector.
Sure.
No, but the inspectors, they always come up with something. And then when you have new buyers, they get freaked out over everything, so
Well,
it's kind of like you have to tell them this is a used home. It's like when you buy a used car.
You know what? That's a great point. And I guess I'm teaching the technical side on this, but how I present it too, when I'm doing with a, I almost verbatim would say exactly, hey, Terry, so just so you know, we're doing an inspection, whether it's a brand new home or a 500-year-old home, you're going to have a 50-page report full of problems, potential problems, and lots of pictures. And they said, the truth is we're going to look at it and we're going to move forward with our eyes wide open. That's why we're doing this. But it's even going to have weird things like wood stacked against the house is going to get called out. Now, would that impede you from moving forward? No. Would you even think of that as being a problem? No. But why they're telling you that is because it can absorb moisture and that'll get into the house. And so it's just a preventative thing. So when you get this, take a deep breath. It's going to be 50 pages. It's going to be really overwhelming, and we're just going to walk through it. Most homes are always going to have a to-do list. So that comes with ownership. So I start
Every
to prepare.
home does.
And I'll also say one thing I can promise you that's going to be on there, and you're going to get the heebie-jeebies, is there's going to be signs of rodent intrusion. Because if you head it off of the past, guys, they're not freaking out. You say like almost every house your house now probably has rodents in the attic or in the crawl space. Have you noticed? No. Okay. So we'll just, but I'll tell a little couple of the things that creep people out, but I'll say, but what we're really looking for is major structural and system defects that we do not have the ability to fix that will cause material defects to the home. So that's really what we're trying to uncover here. So I just have that discussion.
Well, exactly. But a lot of them think, oh, okay, well, the buyer should fix that, because they're selling to us. But, trying to explain to them that it's like buying a used car, they're going to have a few dents.
Yeah. I mean, this is not the easiest part of our job, but it's necessary. And it's actually one of the best parts of our job because we really get to work on our buyer's behalf and try to work the best deal for them with the seller. So if that's the case, you say, hey, Cindy, I hear your concerns and you're right. We're going to take all this information in and we're going to respond appropriately. Now, what are things here that would impede you from moving forward? Okay, well, let's see what kind of help we can get from the seller. Cindy, would you rather me get you money towards closing costs so you can keep that money and hire your own companies afterwards? Or do you want them to fix it? And I just have those discussions. Oh, I really don't want the house. Okay, well, let's get you out. Or oh, I can probably just handle this. Okay, well, if I got $10,000 towards your closing costs, would that be helpful? And would that make you still want to move forward? Oh, for sure. Okay, well, then that's what we asked for. Yeah. So, but that's where our job, so we negotiate the initial offer, but this is like a second go around at negotiating. Maybe they didn't come off at the price, but now we can kind of sharpen our pencil and try to get some concessions made. Because we have site control. And I'll tell you as a person that lists a lot of houses that I don't ever want them to come back to market. That's a pain in the butt. Even if I have a buyer, I might be able to resurrect. The whole timeline starts over again. Now I've got to disclose whatever came up in the inspection that I know about. Now I've got to get my clients excited again. Now I've got Jason. I got to get him going on the marketing again. It's just not fun to remarket a house. And so I am going to encourage my sellers that, hey, you're going to incur a lot of expenses and now it's going to be a stigmatized property. It's in our best interest to try to work with these buyers because they've already spent the money to have an inspection. So they're invested into this home. So let's start talking from that place. Remember, all negotiation is trying to figure out that the parties have the same need. How do we come together? It's not a big fight. It's just talking. So does that clarify it all, Cindy?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. So let's read this. So again, buyer shall not provide the inspection or portions of the report unless the seller requests it. Again, I would demand that in writing before I sent it because we're protecting our buyers. And it says waiver of contingency by buyer. If the buyer provides any portion of the report to the seller without the prior written consent or as required by paragraph 5, which we'll get to, the inspection contingency shall be conclusively be deemed waived. What does that mean? It means if you say, and your best Josiah being the sweet-natured guy he is, says, hey, I just want you to have a picture of the moisture and the delamination in the attic. So here's what the inspector gave us and sends him part of that report. Well, guess what? They don't have to do anything at all. And maybe we were borderline going to walk away. So now we want to walk away. You don't get your earnest money back because Josiah, with his good intentions, sent over the inspection report because that law changed last year and he didn't go to the forms class to realize it. And so now he unknowingly put his clients in a compromising situation. Now there's court litigation and all sorts of stuff to try to get the earnest money. So it's very important that we never send the report over. So
So
important
you
that
just
they
leave those unchecked then?
the seller selection, the seller can check it if they request part of it. So
Okay.
yes, I do. I don't ever send any of it. I will tell them if you want part of it, let me know and I'll be happy to accommodate. We used to send the pictures from the inspection. We
We
wouldn't
used
send
to
the whole
share them all the
report.
time.
Yeah, well, don't share it at all.
Yeah, not anymore.
No. So the selection of either box below by seller shall not be considered a counteroffer. So they're not countering you by saying it. They're just saying, hey, we request the buyer to provide the inspection report to the seller. And I haven't seen this one actually performed because this comes over with the initial offer. So I have to actually dig in and understand the application of that. If buyer requests repairs or modifications to this agreement, seller requests the buyer provide to the seller only the portions for the inspection report related to the requested repairs or modifications to the agreement. So they can ask for the whole report. They can ask for part of the report, but they have to ask for any of it to get any of it. Otherwise, we've waived our seller's right to the inspection and we've sacrificed their earnest money. Well, it keeps referring to paragraph 5. So we see what it says. Additional time for inspections. If an inspector so recommends, buyers shall have additional time to obtain further evaluation of any item by a specialist at buyer's option and expense. If on or before the date of the initial inspection period, buyer provides seller a copy of the inspector's recommendation and notice that buyer will seek additional inspections. If buyer gives timely notice of additional inspections, buyer shall have blank if not filled in after giving the notice to obtain the additional inspection as recommended by the inspector. So I've seen in an offer when we submit this that the listing agent will change these dates to 2 days. Okay, if you're going to need an additional inspection, we're only going to give you 2 days. And so that would be a counter. So it's saying right here, if the inspector calls out the need for additional, we can show them that. And so I would type out the exact verbiage from the inspection report into the 35R when we're requesting it. And then if they want to request pictures or any of that, they can for their own reference, but they cannot stop you from having additional inspections. Are you guys with me so far?
Yeah, I had that happen once. They had to call a structural engineer out, a house down on Possession Lane. And so they did the additional inspection.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know when they're going to come up or what's important to the buyer, but it is a right that they have. And again, that's on their dime and at their discretion.
So the seller consent, that's also would be like a counter offer, wouldn't it? I mean, it would have to come in the form of a counter.
I'm not following you, but by them accepting an offer with an inspection contingency, they've consented to all of this. So they can't say you can't do additional inspections.
No, I mean, under B, seller consent under B.
Yeah. What's your question on
So
that?
if they sign that and then they check on that, then that would be kind of in the form of a counter, right?
No, it literally says not to be considered a counter offer.
Oh, okay.
So the way I see that playing out is if you sent over a 35R, I would probably check that box and send it back over with the 35R requesting it. So
Okay.
most of the time the sellers don't want to see it because it's hearsay unless it's written in front of them. So if you walk away, they don't have to show it. They don't want to know. They want to remain in the dark. And if you want to have professional integrity, you want to protect that too. I would be really irritated. I would be really irritated if Terry said, well, we wanted to buy this house, but look at all this that came up. Yeah, sure. Now you lost the earnest money, but also we have to figure out how to move forward, and now do we want to hire our own inspector to see if that's true? Again, it's buyer beware. So we want to protect that.
Because once you know then you have to reveal it, right?
Exactly. Yep, you have to disclose it. You have to change the Form 17 and disclose it if it's a
Right.
material defect.
So you have to just, that's why you want to just plug your ears and
But
go,
if you
"Oh,
just tell me it's
here."
not a material defect, that's your opinion. That's
Yeah.
you trying to get a better deal. Like, I know that I put that roof on 5 years ago. So you telling me that the roof's at the end of its life is just hearsay. Now, if you send a picture and show that it was improperly installed, that they layered they re-roofed it with a third layer, which is against code. And because of that, they've trapped all the moisture in. And so there's delamination and mold all over that attic. Well, now I know that that's a fact. And I have to tell my sellers that we have to get this fixed and we have to disclose this. Now, if you
Right.
just tell me, like my clients told me that it was put on 5 years ago and I can see it's a brand new shingle. So, I mean, that's pretty extreme example of a material defect. But again, it's like, it's buyer beware. I don't think you're going to have a moldy attic to not know that and not disclose that, just so you know. I'm not saying we're hiding moldy attics. I'm just trying to come up with a pretty black and white example of how that could come into play. So, okay, so let's look at let's say we're going to request stuff. What does that say? Buyer's request for repairs or modifications. If a buyer requests repairs or modifications pursuant to paragraph 3, again, what was paragraph 3? It was telling us the notice that we have given them the notice. So if now that we're in that 10-day time period, 5-day time period, now we're given notice for additional inspections and we're requesting for or request for modifications. The buyer requests modifications pursuant, the parties shall negotiate as set forth in paragraph 6. Buyer's initial request and seller's response made in accordance to the following procedures are irrevocable for the time period provided. So here's what's important. Now I've asked you to make some repairs and some modifications to this. You have to think about it. How much time does the seller have? If we don't change this, they have 3 days. And again, that's business days because we're under 5 days. So it's business days. So if this was a Thursday, it would be Friday, Monday, Tuesday. So they would have until Tuesday or today's Friday. So they'd actually have until Wednesday in this situation to respond if they're going to do anything. So now the computation of time gets us anxious. But again, we still have site control. They can say, we're not going to give you a penny for anything. In fact, we have somebody that wants to buy this house for 10 grand more. So we hope that you go away. Well, they can't make you go away. They just don't have to do anything. And you have the option to walk away or to accept it as is.
Yeah.
So once they've decided, hey, we're going to agree to the repairs and modifications proposed by the buyer. Cool. Done deal. But if they say we agree to some of the repairs, but not all, then the buyer will have 3 days to decide if that works. Or they can reject everything. Offers different or additional repairs or modifications. If seller agrees to the terms of buyer's request for repairs or modifications, this contingency shall be satisfied and buyer's reply shall not be necessary. If seller does not agree to the repairs, buyer shall have the opportunity to reply as follows. So again, if they agree, then it's satisfied. We're done with the inspection contingency. We go from PI to pending. But if they don't, we're still pending inspection. It says the seller does not agree to all the repairs or modifications. We have 3 days from either the day the buyer receives the response or the seller fails to timely respond. So if they just don't respond, that's an answer. They're doing nothing. So now we have 3 days to figure out what we're doing. So again, no response is a response. The seller, okay. If we accept the seller's response, at which the time of this contingency would be satisfied, if agree with the seller on other remedies, or if we disapprove the inspection and terminate the agreement, in this event, the earnest money shall be returned to the buyer. Attention buyer, these time periods for negotiating repairs or modifications shall not repeat. So it doesn't start over again if you don't come to terms. At that point, it says the parties must either reach a written agreement. So that's where a Form 34 can be helpful. Buyer's reply period shall result in the waiver of this inspection contingency, in which the case seller shall be obligated to make any repairs or modification, whatever the contingency shall be deemed waived. So again, if they don't respond, it's waived. If they agree in its entirety, it's waived. We're through the contingency. We go to pending. So let's see what happens if we're going to do some repairs. And this is where I was talking about earlier that we have 3 days prior to closing. It says, okay, we've agreed on all of that. The seller's agreed to make the repairs that we've asked. So how do we move forward with that? It says if seller agrees to make the repairs proposed by buyer, then repairs shall be accomplished at seller's expense in a commercially reasonable manner and in accordance with all applicable laws, no fewer than blank days. So it's going to be 3 days if not changed, if not filled out prior to the closing date. And that's so we can get in there with our inspector again. So if I ask you to fix the roof, I need to have time to go make sure you really fix the roof. And so the guy that called the roof out, I'm going to want him to come back out and re-inspect it. Again, that's at the buyer's cost and at the buyer's discretion. In the case of hazardous materials, repair means removal or treatment, including but not limiting to removal or at seller's option, decommissioning of any oil storage tanks of the hazardous material at seller's expense as recommended by and under the direction of a professional selected by the seller. So again, when we're asking the seller to make the repairs, we're putting the trust in them that they're going to hire a contractor that is good. Now we do get to check off on it, but that being said, if we have the ability, sometimes when we talked earlier about getting a credit towards closing costs, it might actually help the seller have more, or the buyer have more control of the repair, of how it's being done and who they're going to have it done. So it just comes down to the comfort level, availability, and what the best strategy is. Seller's repairs are subject to re-inspection and approval prior to closing by the inspector who recommended the repair. If buyer elects to order and pay for such a re-inspection, if buyer agrees to pay for any repairs prior to closing, the parties are advised to seek the counsel of an attorney to review the terms of that agreement. So again, if your buyers are trying to make the agreements outside of the constructs of these forms, they should get their own legal counsel to overlook it. We're not to be advising on how to do things outside of the forms that have been provided for us and approved by the legalities that govern our industry. So here we go. Sometimes there's oil tanks. You want to have them come out and locate it and make sure that that's there. So that's another inspection you can have. Any inspection regarding oil storage tanks or contamination from such tanks shall be limited solely to determining the presence of or non-presence of oil storage tanks on the property, unless otherwise agreed in writing by the buyer and the seller. And so usually they'll disclose if there's an oil tank. If there's an old decommissioned oil furnace down there, that's a question to ask. This has come up maybe twice in all the transactions I've seen. It's never a big deal. They can go out and decommission it. In fact, we just sold that house in Mukilteo a couple of months ago, and it had an old oil tank and it had not been decommissioned. And the sellers went ahead, once we brought it to their attention, the sellers went ahead and had it decommissioned. I think it was like $300. So don't be scared of oil tanks, just be aware of oil tanks. So again, I don't check the neighborhood review contingency ever. And I'll tell you why. When we started this class, we were talking about when you have a contingency, that's a condition on which has to happen for the sale to move forward. So when we have 100 contingencies, that basically looks to me, when I'm reviewing offers, that this guy really wants a lot of outs because he's just not sure. And so when I first started, I would check every contingency, but my managing broker shared with me that the most protection you have is under this contingency. So if we have the inspection contingency, we don't need to also do neighborhood review. Just have them drive the neighborhood, look at the police reports and see. But it is a right. You do need to share that with your clients, that they have the right to review the neighborhood. So if you check that box, they have 3 days to make sure that it's something that it's in proximity to bus lines, it's in a school zone they like, all of that stuff. But usually we've uncovered most of that on the buyer's consultation, and we're putting them in a place that works for their needs. So that is my class, my fun form class, fun form Friday. But really, the 35 is fun. Remember that. Like, we are going in there and we are tying up a property so we can get the best deal negotiated and the most protections for our client. I'm excited when we can use this form. It's a real bummer that we have not been able to for so long, but it's something that we're going to start utilizing. So remember to watch your timelines. Use your timelines as a tool for negotiating the best situation for you. Again, we can show urgency and still work the timeline to show that we're trying to be courteous to the sellers. My phone is going off.
I put the inspection report in with my offer last night or night before, and they didn't like it. And so he was like, well, you should have had a pre-inspection and all this. And I go, you know what? We're not really in that same market. And I'm sorry, but he's putting 10,000 earnest money. I just want to make sure he's protected, you know?
Yeah, I wouldn't even have those discussions. I'd say, hey, thank you. These are the terms of our offer.
Yeah.
Please present it to your seller. If you don't,
Yeah.
I'll do it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, the one I got to do a couple of weeks ago was like, man, the roof was like end of life and they power washed it. And the siding was like LP siding. That was in that bad time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
that's
it's
it.
like, man, that was like 50 grand right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess that's my important takeaways on this is know your timelines, but also when we talk to our clients with it, it's an opportunity to present, hey, we're moving with our eyes wide open. You're going to have a 50-page report full of things that are going to seem problematic. We're going to look at them together and realize most of those aren't. Some are things to plan for, and some things are going to need urgent, and that's where we start to negotiate. But
Yeah.
again, we set the table and the expectations, and then when we present this to when we go back and we work with the sellers, we want to do it in a way that we're negotiating on behalf of our buyers, but like trying to be courteous with the sellers. But this is an opportunity to really get one last bite at the apple and really get some great concessions for your clients.
Sounds good. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. Do you guys have
Yeah.
any questions?
I don't think so.
And I'll just show you real quick the 35R, which I'm sure most of you have seen, and we can talk about this in detail, but it kept referring to this. And again, so here's your responses. Buyer's inspection of the property is approved and the inspection is satisfied. Thumbs up. Again, if we don't even send this form in, you'll probably have escrow and everybody bugging you, but technically by not responding, we're responding that we're moving forward. I actually did that on my own purchase. It was pretty funny with Chris. I'm like, hey, I'm just not going to respond because we're good. But I still had the lender ask me, hey, where's your 35R? And I'm like, it's not necessary. I wasn't doing it to be right. It was just kind of funny. It's just we're so taught that we have to respond to everything. But if we read through that, it'll explain in plain language what happens. The other response is buyer inspection of the property is disapproved. Please give back our money. We're going to go buy the neighbor's house. Buyer gives notice for additional inspection. That's kind of, we don't really love that. But that works the timeline more, man. That's putting more seed of doubt in the seller. And remember, the longer this stays on the market. So I would say stretch that inspection period out as long as you possibly can, but not at the risk of losing the deal. So if it's only 2 days, it's 2 days. If it's a green agent, they're going to give you 10 days, take 10 days. Even if your inspection's the same day, utilize that timeline, build that angst, build that anxiety. So then we could talk and say, hey, Chris, man, I know we've been on this for a few days. My clients have been back and forth. They really love the feeling of when they pull up to that house. It sets everything off. But now when they walk in, we got this whole honey-do list, man. Like they need to replace the appliances, they don't have good drainage. Like we're building that case. So they're willing to take some of this. But I mean, we're going to need to see a reduction in price of 20 grand to make it make sense to them. Now we have the ability because now it's like the sellers have been waiting for 10 days. All they're reading is the news about how price drops are happening. How price drops are imminent. The market's correcting itself. The market's normalizing. They're scared. So they are like, come on, just tell us what we want so we can get this deal done.
Yeah.
So it's really we can talk about the technicality of it, but the psychology of these forms are also super important.